This is a Brandy Rocks production.
Yes, sir. In Woodhall, there's just about everything known to man in Woodhall. There is some smallies in Woodhall. A lot of people won't fish for the smallies in Woodhall and Oakland. Last year we had a tournament on Lake Oakland. There was a big smallie weighed in that tournament. I know that from past experiences, personal experiences, I know there's been some fish taken into Woodhall and Oakland from some of the folks that live in that area that were taken out of schoolhouse and lakes like that. But there's not a lot of smallies in there. In the springtime, you can get a few smallies right there in the channel between the two lakes, right where Sashball runs over it. You'll see some walleyes in there in the springtime. Not very many, but there's a few walleyes in there. If you go in, both Oakland and Woodhall both have a tremendous largemouth fishery in there. Pike, giant pike. There's a lot of bluegills in there. There's a lot of crappies in there. There's some big crappies in Woodhall, if you can find them. It's just finding them is the hard part. There's a lot of small ones. But yeah, there's just about everything known to man in there. Dogfish, catfish, I've seen it all in there. And that's because of that river system, I think. You know, it keeps a good flow of vegetation and food in there. And these fish just thrive in it, absolutely. Any other questions? Yep, hang on one second. I'm going to come on back there so I can hear you. Okay? Uh-huh. There's no fish on Cass Lake. Wow. I beg to differ with that one, no doubt about it. Cass Lake is by far one of my favorite lakes. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The mistake you're making on Cass Lake is you're looking in the wrong places. People go out on Cass Lake and they say, well, you know, especially later in the summer, okay? Late in the summer, people say, well, those fish must have went deep because there's deep water on this lake. I'm just going to go fish deep. Scott, how many times do you see me fish deep on Cass Lake? Never, ever, ever. If I get out of my boat on Cass Lake, I got to be able to walk the shore. All summer, all fall, all spring, all year round. I never leave 4 foot of water or less. Absolutely not. Largemouth, smallies. You get back in some of those canals, start flipping and pitching some of those docks, you're going to catch some big largemouth. There's some good frog in water. You come out of the boat launch and go all the way around and down to the right end of the lake, as well as back in the guts, right where the launch is at. You got the Clinton River system that runs through there. If you get back in that Clinton River system, you're back in water that's no wider than a Nitro Z8. But you get that boat going up through that water and you get in some of the cuts where they turn. There's some deep holes in there. Pitch a jig down some of those holes. You'll find out what's in there. A lot of tournaments have been won in that little cut right there. I don't mean to give it all away, all your spots, Scott. That's all right. We'll beat you in the store tournament this year if we end up there. Yes, sir.
I want to go back to that. I think over the last 10 to 12 years, there's been a decline in weight and numbers, or the ease of catching 3+ pound smallmouth out there. That's kind of what I've seen over the last 10, 12 years. Back then, you could get a good swing, and now it seems like everybody kind of struggles to break 12, 13 pounds out there.
Okay, did everybody hear that question? Okay. Over the last 10, 12 years, he said, 10, 12 years ago, you used to be able to catch some big weights out on Cass Lake. Over the last 10 or 12 years, they've kind of declined. Catching those bigger fish has been a little bit harder, so on and so forth. I cannot deny that at all. I would have to agree with you 100%. And that all comes with what we're doing as fishermen. No doubt about it. We have to respect our fisheries. We have to respect those fish. We need to make sure that they get released safely. And it's the care that we take of those fish while they're in our live wells in a tournament situation, or the way that we're caring for those fish when we're removing hooks from them, or so on and so forth. It's also, I think, got a lot to do with, and this is just my theory, and I don't think that it's a proven theory by any means, but a lot of the landowners that live on the lakes. It just kills me, and I don't live on a lake, so maybe I don't have much room to talk about it, but I love my lakes and I love fishing these lakes, and you hear these landowners complaining about me fishing their docks, me fishing behind their house, all right? Now I'm a pretty respectable fisherman. If I hook something of yours and I destroy it, I'm gonna come pay for it. I promise you, I'll after that tournament's over, if you're not home, I'll come around and leave my number on your front door if I have to make sure that I pay for whatever I damage. If I get a bait stuck on your dock, I'm going to take the time to stop and get that bait off your dock. A lot of these fishermen today, unfortunately, aren't taking the time to do things like that, okay? But, not to get off that subject, these landowners, they come in here and you hear them complain about us fishing these docks and what we're doing to their docks and their lake and so on and so forth. But what upsets me is what are they doing to the lake, all right? Now, they fertilize their lawn like crazy because everybody wants to outdo the Joneses. They want to outdo the guy next door. My lawn's going to be lusher and greener than yours. So I fertilize it and fertilize it and fertilize it. You get these fertilizer companies that'll come out and they spray your lawn and they take care of it. And I hope that there's nobody in this crowd that actually does that type of work. So they come out and they fertilize these lawns, okay? Well, what happens to that fertilizer? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, you know a lot about more about aquatic life than I do, but I gotta believe that fertilizer's running off into that lake. And you can't tell me that some of these aquatic plant life don't thrive off of that fertilizer, all right? Then they get mad because this plant life's growing up all over the place, which is putting great oxygen in the water, and yeah, too much of it can choke the water out if I'm not, I believe if I'm not wrong, Scott. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong at any point, but again, it's my theory. So this fertilizer runs off into the water, this plant life starts thriving and growing and coming up to the top, it's choking their dock out. Now what do? They come in with sonar or something else and splash it in the lake and kill everything, all right? And they say, oh, it doesn't affect the fish. I wouldn't believe that in 8 million years. You could not give me enough money to make me believe that. And I'll tell you why. Pontiac Lake a few years ago, 15, 20 years ago, you could go out on Pontiac Lake and it was nothing whatsoever to have a night with 5 fish that you had 17, 18 pounds. It was absolutely nothing. That was an average night on Pontiac Lake 15, 20 years ago. You go to Pontiac Lake now, 3 years ago, you go to Pontiac Lake, we'd have tournaments. John Selling has a tournament out of his launch every Thursday night. NBA has a lot of tournaments out of Pontiac Lake. And it got to the point where you were lucky to catch a 14-inch fish. You would catch 100 fish that were 13 3/4 inches. So does it stunt those fish? I don't know. But I tell you this, it definitely did something to that lake. You used to be able to go out and it was fighting to get through the weeds to get to your fishing spot. Now you're fighting to find a chunk of weeds to fish. So these landowners on these lakes, I think, need to quit pointing the finger so much at the fishermen and at us our outdoors people, the outdoors women, the fisherwomen, fishermen, and they need to start maybe looking back at themselves when they're pointing that finger. They got to remember they got 3 more coming back at them. And I think they're a little bit more, I'm just going to say it, and I'm a very opinionated person. If I upset somebody, I apologize, but I think it's more of them than it is what we're doing with our tournaments. We've been very conscious with our tournaments over the last several years, making sure that these fish get put back in the water. I would say our kill ratio is down to, a lot of these tournaments, 0. 100 fish caught, 0 killed. That's pretty darn good. That is pretty darn good. The second thing is I'd like to see our DNR step it up a notch. And in the springtime, when they're concerned about me out pike fishing and wanting to write me a ticket for catching 1 largemouth on accident, why don't they worry about these people sitting over here on the bank that got a bucket full of 12-inch largemouth and they're taking them home? And I go out of my way to make an argument with every one of those people. And that's our job as fishermen. Absolutely. So I think that's what affected Cass Lake a lot over the years, is because of these new chemicals that they're using in these lakes, sonar and some of the other chemicals. I think a lot of what we're doing as fishermen and as fisherwomen are trying to save what we have as our natural resource there, and it's not working out. Now, do I think some of these lakes are overfished? I have a hard time with that one. That one's questionable. I would like to see some of these lakes down to 1 tournament a week, if not 1 every other week. It'd be kind of nice to see that. I'd kind of like to see, if I had a pick of lakes, I'd like to see Lake Orion, Pontiac Lake, and Cass Lake left alone for a whole year and see what happens. That would be my request. If somebody said, we're going to give you anything you want, I would say give me those 3 lakes for a year to 2 years with no tournament. And let's see what happens to those fish.